Better do your research, Parker. Get it done, or I'm failing you.
There you go.
What if Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 5 happened, and Dr. Curt Connors finally became the Lizard? This is FanScription. Dylan Baker's portrayal of Dr. Curt Connors started in Spider-Man 2 back in 2004. He also helped out Peter with his symbiote situation in 2007's Spider-Man 3. There were ideas of the good doctor mutating into the well-known villain the Lizard as early as the first sequel. There's even concept art out there to confirm this. Director Sam Raimi was said to be interested in using him as an antagonist at some point, with rumors of finally pulling the trigger on the transformation in the abandoned Spider-Man 4 movie, or the following installment in the series. You can check out some background on why Spider-Man 4 didn't get off the ground in my video covering the issue, but while the Lizard might have been in consideration, I think it's fairly well known that the Vulture and a version of Felicia Hardy were going to be the main villains of the fourth movie. If Spider-Man 4 happened with those characters in the adversarial roles, I think a proposed Spider-Man 5 would have been the most likely time we could have seen the Lizard on screen, and all that buildup may have very well led to something memorable. Connors is usually a friend of Peter/Spider-Man and a reluctant victim of his own brilliance, which could have made for an emotional storyline. Of course, we eventually did see a version of the character in cinemas. The Lizard was Andrew Garfield's first rogue to defeat in 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man. That same iteration of Connors, played by Rhys Ifans, also popped up in 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home in full monster form. But I think Baker's portrayal of Parker's frenemy was something Spidey fans were waiting for. So that begs the question, how could we integrate the Lizard transformation into the Tobey Maguire universe? Before we answer that, I should mention that this is a sequel to my Spider-Man 4 video from 2021, which itself was a sequel to my What If Venom Wasn't in Spider-Man 3 video from 2019. Overwhelmingly, you guys wanted to see that story continue, and we're doing it here. I consider this a middle chapter to a bigger trilogy, with the 4th, 5th, and 6th movies having their own overarching story. Make sure you check out those other vids before jumping in for the full tale here, because at this point, some major events have gone down. With that said, let's get the ball rolling on FanScription's Spider-Man 5. Enjoy. Danny Elfman's Spider-Man theme plays as the events of the last movie are shown. AT Enterprises CEO Arthur Avis, aka the elderly Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture, comes to town. He kills his lead scientist, Dr. Miles Warren, and turns Peter into an old man, but is defeated by the combined efforts of Spidey, Gwen Stacy, and Curt Connors, cheating death no more. That doesn't apply to Dr. Warren, though, as we see him smirking in Peter Parker's old apartment, ending the opening credits. The movie kicks off in the middle of a bank heist. Led by Hammerhead in his first appearance in the series, a gang of thugs have taken hostages inside. On the street, police have arrived to negotiate their release. The cops are headed up in part by former officer, now Sergeant, Jefferson Davis. Hammerhead has no plans of yielding when Spider-Man shows up, swinging into the center of the action. In an act of precision, experience, stealth, and pure skill, Spidey frees the hostages and takes down every thug. The only challenge being Hammerhead himself, who gets one charging headbutt in before being webbed up. Davis and Spider-Man have formed a strong professional admiration for one another and have a brief conversation outside before one of the officers suddenly takes out a gun and points it directly at Davis. Spider-Sense blaring, Peter's able to stop the rogue cop and restrains him. Davis walks up to his would-be assassin as the facade falls and the illusion is broken. Mysterio is revealed behind shielded tech. Sergeant Davis pops off his dome and recounts how the mob's plan to release him didn't pay off for either party. Mysterio levels a personal threat at Davis, who has his officers haul the criminal away. Mysterio has had a grudge against Davis for a while now, and with the sergeant rising in the ranks of the force, Beck tried to take him out then and there. Davis again thanks Spidey and mentions he has yet to meet his son, who's a big fan. Peter promises he'll get the chance soon enough before whipping away and leaving the scene to the cops. While he swings through the urban jungle in his classic suit, looking good as new, we hear the trademark narration of Spider-Man, reading another annual chapter in his journal to the late Mary Jane Watson. He mentions it's been 1 year since the Vulture's defeat, and he's more grateful than ever to feel like a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man once again. Most New Yorkers are starting to embrace him like before, as he has the approval of many residents and even public officials. He mentions it's a good thing the mob/Mysterio run-in was a short one, since he has an appointment with a very special lady that he can't break. We cut to Peter walking his elderly Aunt May through the cemetery on a beautiful summer day. They arrive at the resting place of Ben Parker on the anniversary of his death. It's a yearly tradition that the Parkers are determined to keep, even with Aunt May now living in her nursing home. They pay their respects and acknowledge it's been 10 years without Ben. Sometimes it feels much longer than that, other times much shorter. On their way out, May playfully mentions that one of her nurse's younger sister is single and sounds like a very nice young woman. Peter laughs off the suggestion, alluding that he's heard it many times before. He also says he has to make sure they're not late for their next stop. Watching them from a distance, we see the back of a figure leer on as the pair leave the cemetery. 6 candles on a birthday cake are blown out as cheers envelop the backyard of a suburban home. Curt Connors and his wife Martha embrace their young son Billy. A couple dozen guests are treated to dessert as Peter walks in with Aunt May. They greet the Connors family before seeing Gwen Stacy. Martha and May begin chatting as Peter and Gwen catch up off to the side. They still work in the same department since Peter was hired as a full-time professor at Empire State University last fall. After taking down the Vulture together, Connors and Stacy are 2 of a very small group of people who know Peter is Spider-Man. Thus, they discuss the Hammerhead Mysterio heist from earlier, which leads to a discussion about Uncle Ben's anniversary, and Gwen venting about how her mom has recently remarried. Her father, Captain George Stacy, died the same night as MJ and Harry Osborn years ago. She doesn't think her stepdad is a bad guy, but she's had arguments with her mom about the situation. However, the thing that Gwen is most upset about is when her mother told her that maybe it's time Gwen finds a husband of her own. Stacy took exception to that comment and admits it's hard to find a guy who lives up to the standards her father set for his baby girl. Plus, the last time she went on a date, the guy ended up being a youth-sucking birdman. Peter brings up that May's been pushing the same thing lately. Billy is soon opening his presents with his parents at his side and young friends looking on. He gets a baseball glove as one of the gifts and asks his dad to play catch. Martha tries to politely explain that they can play later when everybody goes home. She knows Curt can be self-conscious about his amputated arm. But, not wanting to disappoint his son, Connors agrees. Peter, Gwen, and May smile as the 2 start to play. Billy enthusiastically makes Curt put on a glove, which makes things a bit more awkward. He misses a throw from his son and drops the glove trying to pick up the ball. Some of Billy's friends snicker under their breath. Embarrassed, the kid tells his father it's okay and they can play another time. Curt agrees and watches his son go off with his pals, but he's clearly upset. He looks at the glove and tosses it aside with deflated effort. Martha walks over to try and comfort him, but Curt ignores her. Gwen, Peter, and May exchange sympathetic looks. That night, we see Curt closing the door on his sleeping son's room. The incident from earlier seems to be bothering him more than usual. Martha tries to convince her husband that maybe it's time Billy knew about the accident that caused Curt's arm to be amputated. Then their child may have a better understanding about his father's limitations. Curt refuses, saying the boy's too young for an old war story, and he clearly resents the term limitations. He tells her he'll be okay and to go to bed. The doctor is going to be up late, catching up on work. Curt is at his desk later in the evening checking his email. A new title catches his eye that reads, "Lending a Hand." Connors doesn't recognize the email address as it's labeled from a Jack 129. Inside, a mysterious message goes on about wanting to help the professor. This person seems to have access to all of Curt's data on his failed limb restoration experiments. Attached is a formula for an antigen that the emailer says to try on one of his mouse specimens at the ESU lab. The formula combines Curt's research on reptile regeneration with a few elements he's never seen before. Connors is intrigued at first, but trashes the email due to the odd nature of it. He closes out his web browser to see a picture of him and his son on the desktop background. Billy is hugging his father tightly with both arms, while Curt holds his son with the one he has. A sad expression shifts to determination. After a moment, he pulls his email back up and reopens the discarded message. The next day, an armored truck is transporting a bank's assets to a separate location across the city. On a fairly empty side street, a trap is sprung by several cars whose drivers have memorized the truck's route. They block the truck from advancing or backing up. Masked mobsters, part of Hammerhead's gang, pop out of the vehicle and start firing at the officers in the truck. The cops are protected by the bulletproof exterior, but still panic and call for backup, yelling about how they're surrounded by heavy fire. Just then, Spider-Man swings in and starts disarming the gangsters. He seems a little more violent than usual, clocking a few of the criminals across the street. When they're all taken care of, the officers exit the truck to thank Spidey, but he walks right past them, shoving them hard into the side of their vehicle. The wall crawler uses his strength to pull the doors off the back and takes several trunks of cash out. Silently, he webs away, leaving the disoriented cops confused. The following afternoon at a Queens nursing home, we see Peter eating lunch with Aunt May. Their conversation turns when Peter realizes he's running behind for work, as usual. May wants him to stay so he can meet her nurse, whose sister they're trying to fix up with Peter. Parker finishes the rest of his food quickly, kisses his aunt on the forehead, and jets, dodging a bullet. A moment after he leaves, May's male caretaker enters to take her back to her room. We don't see his face, as May says he just missed meeting her nephew. The nurse says he'll have to catch him next time, and asks May more information about Peter, which she enthusiastically divulges in another tale of her nephew's youth. Peter pounds the pavement, trying to get to a nearby bus stop when a newspaper rack catches his attention. It's an afternoon edition of the Daily Bugle. The headline reads, "Spider-Man turns thief." He feeds the machine for a copy and looks closer, seeing that Spidey has been implicated in the robbery of a cash-in-transit vehicle. Confused, he hears his bus pulling out. It's too far away now, as Peter is left without a ride. Annoyed, he peers back at the paper when the distinct snarl of J. Jonah Jameson rings out behind him. Peter is surprised to see his old boss, as Jonah explains he was trying to find him at May's nursing home. Before Peter can question how he knows where his aunt is staying, Jonah goes off about the Daily Bugle. Since the events of the last movie, Jameson quit the old paper when they kept forcing him to fire more staff. Now he owns his own struggling rag called JJ's Journal. He says the Bugle has become despicable, printing a story like that. Peter agrees, thinking the headline is the reason, but Jonah's point is that they have no pictures catching Spidey in the act. Jameson was hoping Peter could get his old friend Spider-Man to give an exclusive interview to JJ's Journal. The hope is to help propel them into the same league as the Bugle. Peter is stunned by Jonah's boldness and silently walks off in the opposite direction. Jameson shouts that Peter should take some time to think about it before yelling that his number hasn't changed. At ESU, Peter walks in late to see that Gwen is covering his class. They talk in the back office where Parker apologizes, trying to show Gwen the newspaper and explain the wild Jonah situation. Stacy, however, is in a big rush. She talks a mile a minute about what she has the class working on and gives Peter a few notes before quickly mentioning this has all made her late for her date. Peter is surprised and tries asking a few questions, but Gwen's tunnel vision doesn't allow it. Coming off more frantic than mean, she talks over him and says they'll catch up later before exiting the office. Parker is left with another unexpected event added to his day. One can tell that Gwen having a date has gotten under his skin, but he brushes it off as he again looks down at the newspaper and her notes. Peter's eye moves to the window attached to the laboratory, where Dr. Connors is heavily focused on mixing a liquid. The look on his face is more serious than usual, which Peter takes note of before returning to his class. Inside the laboratory, Connors loads the liquid into a syringe and walks over to a caged mouse they have there for specimen work. The little white rodent is missing a limb on the same side as the doctor. Sweating, he looks around to make sure no one is watching and injects the mouse with the liquid. We cut to a few minutes later, where Connors is on his work computer emailing the person who sent him the formula. The camera racks focus to see that the mouse has regrown his missing limb and is functioning without a problem. It's explained through the email exchange that Connors was instructed to use some of AT Enterprise's leftover genetic samples that ESU acquired after the company was shut down last year. The doctor is ecstatic that it worked and asks for more information on human testing, but the mysterious sender, still calling himself Jack, only replies that Curt will have to pick up a package from him soon and gives a location and time. Connors is skeptical before Peter walks in, startling him. He wanted to make sure Curt was all right since they didn't have a chance to talk much at Billy's birthday. The doctor affirms his well-being and puts on a falsely calm face, excusing himself from the lab. Peter remarks to himself that no one wants to talk to him today. He then humorously says hi to the mouse in the cage. Gwen is seen downtown with her date, Steve, sitting outside a restaurant. They were set up by some mutual friends and it seems to be going well enough, but they're interrupted by a commotion on the street. Spider-Man is seen swinging away from a dozen or so police cars chasing him. Stacy looks at a mounted TV inside the restaurant that has live coverage of the chase. The news report says Spider-Man broke into the former Oscorp/AT Enterprises building and escaped with some classified materials, injuring several guards in the process. The news helicopter gets too close to the action, and Spidey webs up the rotor blades. It goes into freefall as New Yorkers below run for cover. Jumping onto the scene is the authentic Spider-Man, who in 2 seamless swings saves the pilot and newscaster, placing them on the roof of a nearby building. Meanwhile, the copter crashes into the side of a skyscraper where it slowly tips back the other way and falls straight down onto the restaurant where Gwen and Steve are. Quickly, Spider-Man forms a massive web to catch the copter. The web stretches near Stacy and her date before Spidey swings down to check on Gwen. He acts as if he knows her, which Steve catches onto and asks if they're familiar with each other. Comedically, they both deny it and awkwardly shake hands, with Peter calling Gwen a fine citizen and Gwen calling Peter Mr. Spider-Man. Steve is puzzled as the cops surround the webhead, guns drawn. Sergeant Davis breaks through the crowd and orders the police to lower their weapons. He tells the wall crawler he has to bring him in for some questioning, but Peter panics and swings off, making Spider-Man look guilty of committing the previous crimes. At his condo that evening, Peter steams at seeing news reports blaming Spider-Man for the disaster downtown. It's described as a part of the latest in a string of criminal acts by New York's supposed hero. He's had enough and calls up J. Jonah Jameson, saying he has an exclusive that will make JJ's journal the talk of the town. On the other end of the line, Jameson pauses and squints his eyes, before obliviously asking who's calling him. Later into the night, Curt Connors is seen driving alone into the warehouse district. He comes upon a familiar building with old police tape loosely wrapped around it, flowing in the wind. We recognize this warehouse as the Vulture's Nest from the previous film. All the equipment inside has been shut down or removed. Connors yells into the dark, hoping to hear a reply. He's taking a huge risk coming out here by himself, but the possible breakthrough this anonymous emailer has could change the world. For science, he tells himself. For Billy. He walks into a tripwire and falls to the ground, where a platform lowers him beneath the main floor. What comes into focus is an even more advanced laboratory. It's obvious this has been there all along, undiscovered by authorities. A voice is heard from the shadows and limps into the light. The figure wears a dark green suit with a black cane and an animal-shaped helmet-like mask covering part of his face. When the mask is removed, Connors is shocked to see Dr. Miles Warren still alive. Warren's face looks heavily scarred and his body seems worn down, but there's no doubt who this is. Warren apologizes for the theatrics, but he's not the handsome man he used to be. He explains that the neogenic serum they were working on last year can perform miracles, hence his life remaining intact. Toombs, the fool, didn't realize what they really had. Warren wants to continue the work he and Connors were doing the year prior. He says he perfected the antigen Curt used on the mouse a few weeks ago, and he has another version almost ready for human consumption. The problem is, there's no way anyone will let him test it. Considering the state he's in, Connors is the only avenue to share this discovery with the world. They just need visible proof of its capacity to work, and this, he says, is just the beginning. He knows Connors has the resources and the brains to complete the serum, and he'll hand it over on the condition that Connors tells no one that he's still alive. That will be done when the time is right. Connors is confused by all of this, but he has to believe his own eyes. Miles Warren is still somehow breathing right in front of him. The antigen formula he sent earlier did work. Curt and Miles were friendly and respected each other when they worked together. Warren denies knowing what Toombs is really up to as the Vulture, and selfishly, Connors thinks of his own son. These rationalizations override some of Curt's better judgment, and he agrees to Warren's conditions. It's never outright said, but it's heavily implied that Connors returned to Warren after he uses the serum on himself. Miles slowly slips a vial in Curt's jacket pocket, along with a few folded up pages of notes, and shakes his hand. Out in front of ESU at the end of the next workday, Peter and Gwen discuss the imposter Spider-Man ordeal, and Peter's long-shot plan to get the real story out there. He's holding up a copy of JJ's journal, mentioning that one can tell how desperate Jonah is by finally stepping out of the last century and hiring someone to build a website so the paper can get more traction. The opinion among the public seems to be split, with a small majority buying Spider-Man's exclusive interview claiming a fake web-slinger has been perpetrating these crimes. Dr. Connors is seen exiting the science building where Peter and Gwen fill him in on these developments. Connors seems barely interested, and when asked how he thinks this imposter has duplicated Spider-Man's powers, he gives a vague answer about how technology can make anything possible nowadays. He says he has to get home, and leaves the pair worried about his recent strange behavior. They decide the next time they see him, they'll try and get to the bottom of what's really bothering their friend and mentor. In the middle of the night, after his family has gone to bed, Connors sweats bullets in his basement. He completed work on the serum at ESU's lab earlier in the day, and his right arm is exposed with a syringe ready. After taking a deep breath, he plunges the needle into his shoulder, and the formula seeps in. His breathing becomes more labored. Pain reverberates throughout his body while the doctor tries his best to muffle his agony. Violently, muscle tissue begins to grow out of his amputated arm, sporting an unnatural green hue. Finally, the limb seems to be fully extended. It's covered by a thick layer of skin that Connors breaks and peels away, revealing a fully restored, healthy human arm. Curt is mesmerized and emotional. A few tears drip down his face. Ecstatic, he rushes upstairs and wakes up his wife, who's completely freaked out by her husband's regrown arm. Before she can stop him, Curt bursts into Billy's room and shakes him awake with a new limb. The moonlight shines on this miracle of science as the boy wakes up, flabbergasted at what he sees. Tears of joy fully flow as Curt finally hugs his son with two appendages. He squeezes tightly, not wanting to let go, but he's forced to after Billy screams. Connors pulls back and glances down. The moonlight illuminates scales growing on the new arm. He races to the bathroom and sees part of his face and neck are covered in growing green spots. He glances to the doorway where Martha is trying to calm down a hysterical Billy. Mrs. Connors is frightened as Curt takes a few pitiful steps in their direction. She instinctively places their son behind her in a protective gesture. Horrified, she asks what her husband has done to himself. Not able to bear the pain of watching his family cower in fear of his appearance, Curt grabs one of his lab coats to cover up and leaps out of the upstairs window with accelerating agility. He sprints into the shadows as the green scales continue to take over his body. We cut to the laboratory of Dr. Miles Warren, where the above platform is smashed to the ground with a figure landing on it, buried in the smoking debris. Out steps Connors, who's fully transformed into the lizard. He screams at a masked Warren about what he did to him and pulls him close for a potential killing strike. Miles, however, has the upper hand and explains if Connors ever wants to be normal again, he'll need Warren alive. The scarred doctor expounds on how he didn't lie to Connors. He sarcastically counts 2 arms and that their plan is still in place, just not in the way Curt thought. Warren will transform Connors back to normal if and only if he brings him Spider-Man, alive and well. Warren is unclear on the reason and simply says science demands it. The longer Connors is stuck in his lizard form, the more primitive his mind will become until he's a monster, inside and out. The clock is ticking for the mutated professor as he has no other choice. Connors runs off while Warren's painful laugh staggers through yellow teeth. From here, we have a few scenes where Lizard is looking for Peter directly. He struggles to maintain his fading human side and tries to stay out of sight, but Connors can't find Peter or Spider-Man anywhere. After an intense interrogation at Gwen's home, it's apparent Connors' logical brain is fading away as he becomes more aggressive, animal-like, and desperate. He pulls himself away from hurting his colleague, with Stacy left scared stiff. Gwen warns Peter about the situation and they meet up to try and devise a plan. Stacy does her best to cobble together an antidote from materials and notes found at the ESU lab, along with DNA samples left at her home from the attack. Spider-Man reaches out to Sergeant Davis about putting Martha and Billy under special protection, a request Davis doesn't take lightly since Spidey is still a wanted man. Trusting in the hero, the sergeant obliges. With the antidote ready and sightings of a giant lizard man centralizing in a certain area of New York's sewers, Spider-Man is hoping to cure his friend without hurting him. This leads to a scene with Spidey crawling around in the city's underground drainage system while being guided by Gwen through an earpiece. Heat sensors in Spider-Man's suit give Stacy a clear picture of anything alive a few dozen feet in any direction. Peter outwardly thanks Felicia Hardy for leaving behind some tech in the suit Spider-Man defeated the Vulture in. This sequence is full of tension and eventually leads to an attack by a nearly feral Curt Connors. Their fight spills out of the sewers and into the middle of crowded streets. When Spidey finally has the chance, he injects Lizard with the antidote. While it disorients him for a few moments, the shot doesn't work, to the heartbreak of both Gwen and Peter. After a long battle, Lizard overpowers Spider-Man and knocks him out with a massive tail whip. The last shreds of humanity surge forth and stop Lizard from biting the webhead's head clean off. There's just enough of Connors left to carry Spider-Man off and deliver him to Dr. Warren. We see the reptilian creature arrive at the hidden lab and throw an unconscious Spider-Man to the crooked doctor's feeble feet. Warren is almost giddy with excitement as he unmasks Peter and starts to hook him up inside a stasis pod. Just as Warren secures Parker, loud noises are heard above, and a large group of police, led by Sergeant Davis, forces their way in upstairs. Gwen contacted them with the location by using the tracer in Spidey's suit. All hell breaks loose when the lizard starts attacking. Peter wakes up, shatters his pod, remasks, and instantly joins the two-floor battle. Warren treads out of sight and slips away unnoticed, never seen by Spidey or the cops. On his way out, he hits a button on the wall. Another stasis pod starts bubbling next to him as all the experiments are destroyed by fail-safe explosions, setting fire to the warehouse. Spider-Man and Lizard resume their fight in the flames, this time with police in the middle of the fray. Lizard seems to have the upper hand when the imposter Spider-Man shows up. Working together without even realizing it, the Spider-Men finally knock Lizard out by double swing kicking him out of the warehouse and into a large tree outside. That threat may be neutralized, but the police don't know which wall crawler is the genuine article. After they're brought outside, away from the fire, the cops all start pointing their guns at both figures. Sergeant Davis can't even tell the difference, and asks questions that the two webheads identically answer. Eventually, one of the Spider-Men web up a few guns, and the police start firing against Davis's orders. Both use their spider sense and other abilities to get out of the area unharmed. They then begin fighting themselves, each trying to take the other in. They eventually end up at a massive, fully functioning power plant with workers scurrying away as the tussle spills in and out of the buildings along the riverbank. Huge smokestacks billow out pale vapors that frame the New York skyline in the background. Both Spideys think themselves the real deal and argue as fists fly. This scrape gets more dangerous the higher they climb. On the edge of one of the gigantic cylinders, one of them starts to doubt his authenticity when questioned about why he's been stealing money and classified items from the old Oscorp building. At first he denies this, but starts panicking when his memories don't line up. The identity crisis turns into physical pain as this Spidey begins holding his head before slipping. He falls into the thickly clouded abyss below. Spider-Man whips out a web, but it fails to connect. He does everything he can to search for his doppelganger, both outside and inside the building. no body is found, but it easily could have been incinerated in the roaring fires at the bottom of the smokestack. We cut to some time later. Connors is arrested, stuck in his lizard form. The police transfer him to a special containment unit within Rikers Island. The brilliant mind of Curt Connors has been lost to the beast, as the doctor is now nothing but an aggressive, dangerous animal. Peter and Gwen visit to see this firsthand, and there's not anything close to a look of recognition in the lizard's reptilian yellow eyes. They mention that Martha is heartbroken and can't bear to tell Billy the news, saying his father has gone overseas for work. Parker has yet to find any leads on what happened to the other Spider-Man or where he came from in the first place. The police pin the hidden lab on Connors with no other clues to go on after the whole warehouse was burned down, and Spidey is still wanted by New York's finest. This whole ordeal has brought Peter and Gwen even closer, as the pair share in more misery together. Gwen is Peter's only confidant regarding his life as Spider-Man, since she's directly become a part of it. Seeing what's happened to Dr. Connors hastens the undeniable fact that things can change in an instant, and when it comes to the people you care about, true feelings shouldn't be left unsaid. A conversation at ESU a couple weeks after the lizard fight leads to Peter innocently asking what Gwen was doing after work. She responds by saying she's looking for a new apartment since the lizard tore hers up. When Parker teases her about not having another date with Steve, Gwen forwardly asks why he's so interested in her love life. Peter is awkwardly silent before Stacy defiantly states it's not like he'll ever ask her out. There's a moment of quiet. They've been platonic friends for so long that neither has even given much thought to the idea. After a few seconds, they both laugh off the sentiment, Peter saying she almost had him, and Gwen going along with it. Parker soon heads out for the day, but a lingering look by Stacy reveals a concealed sincerity. Spider-Man swings back to Peter's condo with a closing narration. It's a more melancholy one, talking about Connors and questioning what MJ would want for him at this stage in his life. We see Peter writing a note in his Mary Jane journal before a distinct feeling comes over him. He puts the journal away with a strange sense of finality and thinks back to his last conversation with Gwen. He looks at a picture of Dr. Connors, Gwen, and himself as the camera zooms in on Parker and Stacy. Spontaneously, he grabs his jacket and heads for the door. As he opens it, the blood drains from Peter's face. He stands still as a dead man. A shot of the doorway shows an exhausted, filthy, but very much alive Mary Jane Watson. "Hi, Tiger," are the only words that escape her lips as fearful eyes look up at him. Peter drops his jacket, and we cut to black. Cliffhanger! This new trilogy will wrap up with a potential Spider-Man 6, which I plan on making eventually if you guys have enough interest in this storyline. There's a lot I could say about the choices made here and where we're going, but I don't want to give anything away just yet. All I'll mention is, don't trust Miles Warren as far as you can throw it. So speculate away, folks. Where do you think the story goes from here? What did you think of this version of the Lizard? And what subjects do you want us to cover in future episodes? Let me know in the comments. As always, make sure you check out the FanScription podcast for audio versions of all our episodes, and we'll see you soon with another What If Wondermaker. Bye-bye, Tigers.